Before I share this story, there is something you must know. A premonition is a vision or a dream about the future. In my family, premonitions are common. Most notably, when my father was 12 years old, he had a dream about a large lady in a round, brimmed hat wearing a floral dress. He believed it was a sign from God that this person would be necessary in his life. Years later, in his 20s, my father moved into a house some church members ran as an Airbnb. To cut a long story short, the lady from his dream owned the house. The house is also where he met my mother for the first time. Now I am no stranger to premonitions. I've had dreams about the future that end up coming true. I consider this to be God telling me it will be alright. However, this dream, or premonition, whatever you want to call it, was the most confusing, grisly, scary, and bone-chilling thing I've ever experienced. And I kid you not, this is 100% true through and through. I remember that this experience happened years ago, and I just found out about your channel a few months ago. So if some things don't make sense, I apologize in advance. Anyway, my dream started when I was 6 years old. My father and I were in a car I didn't recognize. I later found out the car was a custom Toyota Prado with a bull bar and a snorkel. These details will be necessary, so try to remember that. We were driving to my grandmother's house in Canberra. To get there, we would have to journey down the highway through seemingly endless spans of Australian bush and farmland surrounding us. In the dream, my phone, which I didn't even own at the time, had recently died. So, I decided to look out the window to pass the time. With that, I saw a vast, gnarly-looking cat keeping pace with the car. It had piercing green eyes and a leopard print. It remained for a few seconds, then disappeared into the bush. Being naive and a dumb kid, I woke up from my dream thinking of how cool it was that I could have dreams like that. Fast forward 10 years and my family is taking a trip to see my grandmother in Canberra. At the time, my dad had recently purchased a new car, and would you believe it, it was precisely the exact same car in my dream, snorkel, bull bar, and all. This was the first trip we had gone on in this specific car. We were driving down the highway with the same endless expanse of bush, just like in my dream. It was picture perfect, as if the tiniest details were accurate in the dreamscape. It was at sunup that we noticed that where exactly we were driving. My phone had recently died on the trip. Being a biology fanatic, I decided to look out the car's window to survey the land and enjoy the surrounding wildlife. I did this for about 5, maybe 10 minutes. I was about to look away when something caught my eye. I diverted my attention away, back from the Australian bush. There, just 20 meters away from the car, was the shape of a large cat running through the trees. I rubbed my eyes to make sure what I was seeing was actually true. It was. The shape soon emerged from the tree line for just a brief second. It was now 10 meters from the car and closing. This cat was speedy, with a leopard-like pattern and piercing green eyes. As it started to keep pace with the car, it ran onto the lane beside our vehicle on the left. As I got closer, my jaw almost ripped out of my mouth from how fast it dropped to the drawer. There, just mere meters from the car, was what I can only describe as a Smilodon. For those who do not know, a Smilodon is the official scientific taxation on the common umbrella term saber-toothed cat. Now understand that a common misconception is that saber-toothed tigers existed. Instead, they're actually saber-toothed cats because they're not necessarily tigers. But I digress. From memory, the Smilodon was at least lengthwise the size of the car and as tall as the average man. It also had piercing green eyes and leopard patterning, sharp claws attached to the powerful muscular sleek arms, a stub for a tail, and 2 substantial razor-sharp sabers about 30 centimeters long. It kept pace with the car for a few seconds. However, those mere seconds felt like hours. It let out a guttural, terrifying, primitive roar that shook the spine inside of me and sent ripples of dread through my freaking body. Its green eyes pierced me like sharp spears. I could feel it. It could sense my fear. When I thought it would ram the car off the road into the ditches and ravines below, it quickly disappeared into the tree line. I rubbed my eyes again and then saw nothing. I don't remember much after what happened after that. When I awoke the next day, I was in an unfamiliar room. We had stopped at a hotel near a country town for the night. My mother was beside me, praying I'd wake up. She noticed I was awake and hugged me while thanking God in Greek. I asked my mother what happened, and why we were here, and that's when she told me she found me passed out in the car and I would not wake up. I felt exhausted once again and fell back asleep. We checked out of the hotel the next day and continued the drive to Grandma's house. We spent 2 days there and came back home without issue. However, years later, I'm in bed reading some articles. Something caught my eye. I clicked on an article in the recommended section. My eyes slowly widened as I read the article. The headline read, "Biotech engineering company Colossal dumps $15 million into funding the Mammoth cloning project." I read further down the article in disbelief. The article continued, "However, the mammoth isn't the only prehistoric animal Colossal is resurrecting back from the dead. They also have reported on cloning several more species such as the thylacine, the dodo, and the smilodon." I started to get cold sweats and a wave of dizziness and nausea overwhelmed me as those memories of that bone-chilling morning came flushing back. I could hear the primitive roar of the smilodon. I could hear it in my ears all these years later. It's like recounting a haunting that you lived or something. It's kind of weird. I still get minor premonitions. Though they're minor, like a storm that happens on this date or something like that, they still have caused quite a bit of trouble in my life. I'm still scared of the capabilities my brain and the Lord have given me. But, despite all this, I still have unanswered questions. Was this a vivid hallucination? Did I actually encounter the Smilodon? What do you guys think? Hopefully, someone here will have the answer to my question. I have been wondering about this for about 36 years. When I was around 8 years old, I was with my mother at a grocery store. I looked up and saw something, but I still don't know what it was. The creature was my height or a little bit shorter. It had brown, rough skin, and its head was about 1/4 of the body. It had a very broad figure. It was a bit human-looking, but definitely not a human. It was dressed in human winter clothing and in bluish colors. The face was huge with a very big mouth, downturned into a sort of grumpy expression. I don't know what I saw, so I looked up at least 5 times to see if it was actually there, double-taking. I remember that because I was very scared of the number 5 for a long time afterward. The same goes for the color blue because the creature wore clothes in different shades. My mother really didn't notice anything unusual and got annoyed with me because I suddenly started behaving weirdly. She was tired and a bit stressed and wanted to go home herself. I didn't say anything to her because I usually kept my problems to myself. I have been Googling this many times and trying to figure out what I saw, without any result. I've been listening to this show for years now and I still haven't heard anything similar. I have never seen any strange things after that. What do you think I saw all that time ago? There's something about the Finger Lakes that suggests the possibility of supernatural and mysterious things. Legends and stories abound of hauntings, spirit happenings, utopian communities, ancient ruins, inexplicable phenomena, extraterrestrial visits, and the occasional glimpse of even Sasquatch. Among the most intriguing stories are the numerous reported sightings in the deepest parts of the lake. An aquatic creature, a lake monster if you will. Each of the Finger Lakes has its own personality, of course, but the lakes Seneca and Cayuga seem to fit within a different, more mysterious category. Their waters are colder, their moods are darker, their waves are bigger. You can travel on boats to and from the sea to these 2 lakes, and their sheer size seems to hint at the possibility of ancient aquatic megafauna. Native Americans believed Seneca Lake to be a bottomless lake, with a monster that lived within its depths. Almost 40 miles long, deep, and 1 to 3 miles wide, the pitch-black depths of the both, hundreds of feet deeper than sunlight can penetrate, descend to depths below sea level. Reports of monsters in Cayuga Lake were numerous, perhaps even routine in the 1800s. It can be inferred from a story from January 5, 1897, in an edition of the Ithaca Journal. Incredibly, the piece reported that a recent sighting marked the 69th consecutive year in which there was a confirmed encounter with the monster nicknamed Old Greenie. The story went on to recount that the member of the newspaper staff had been living in daily anticipation of Old Greenie's appearance, and had refused reporting assignments that would have taken them near the lake because they were afraid of the monster. The 1897 incident was reported to have been by an Ithaca resident who was driving along the lake's eastern shore and saw what he knew must be the large, long sea serpent. Of course, there were many people trying to debunk it as some sort of tramp or muskrat. Sporadic and isolated reports of the creature would continue until about 1929, when people began reporting not one, but two creatures sighted together along the lake's eastern shore. The creatures were described by witnesses as being 12 to 15 feet in length. It was speculated that they might be members of the Seneca Lake sea serpent family that found their way into the local waters through a subterranean channel, which is believed to exist between the two lakes. Legends of tunnels connecting Cayuga and Seneca lakes have circulated for many, many years, which anyone with a rudimentary grasp of the notion of water seeking its own level knows could be possible. Occasional other reports of Old Greenie have certainly been made since then, including a 1974 attack in which a teenage boy apparently had his arm broken and bit by a large eel-like creature, and the local 1979 encounter by a professional diver of a submerged animal 30 to 35 feet in length. Still, all the reported sightings, save one, have been by one or two persons. The incident with the greatest number of witnesses, and therefore the most credible lake monster encounter, happened on the evening of July 14, 1899 on Seneca Lake. The side-wheeled steamboat Otetiani, named to evoke the region's Iroquois past, was traveling north toward Geneva from Watkins Glen, with several dozen passengers at about 7 p.m. Sunset was at approximately 8:40, so there was plenty of daylight left, and it had been a sunny and seasonably warm high 79. Somewhere between Dresden on the west side of the lake and Willard on the east side, pilot Frederick Rose reported that approximately 400 yards ahead of the boat was what appeared to be an overturned boat. Captain Carlton Herendeen examined the thing with his telescope, later describing its appearance as being 25 feet long with a very sharp bow and long narrow stern. Passengers began to gather. It was a group of some ostensibly credible witnesses, including two commissioners of public works, a police commissioner, the manager of the Geneva Telephone Company, and a geology professor. As Captain Herendeen completed his inspection, the pilot signaled the engineer to slow down the boat. The steamboat approached to within 100 yards and lowered a boat to take a closer look. Suddenly, the object turned and began to move away. The captain immediately ordered a full speed ahead. As the thing was moving slowly, the steamboat gained on it easily. The object turned again, this time toward the steamboat, raising its head, looking in the direction of the boat, and opening its mouth, displaying 2 rows of sharp white teeth. Captain Herendeen declared that he would ram the creature and take it alive, if possible. Otherwise, he would kill it and take it aboard or tow it to Geneva. This was the United States in 1899, when conservation of flora and fauna was still kind of fringe. Out west, the bison population, perhaps 10 million in 1850, had been reduced to fewer than 1,000. Passenger pigeons, numbering in the billions in 1860, were on the brink of extinction. And so the boat was turned so that the boat would approach the creature from the side at a ramming speed. The deck of the steamboat was crowded with passengers who were ordered by the captain to put on life preservers. According to the Geneva Gazette, every eye on deck was fixed on the monster and hardly a person was breathing normally. While the boat was yet some distance from it, the monster again looked at the boat, sank out of sight, and the boat passed over the spot where it had been. As the steamboat approached within 50 yards of the creature, the captain gave the order to turn the boat so that its paddle wheel would strike the creature midway between its head and tail. The boat went full steam ahead and struck the monster with enough impact that many of the passengers were thrown off their feet. The mortally wounded animal lay in the water next to the steamboat. It raised its head, gave a sound like a gasp, and lay quiet. Its spinal column had been broken and it was dead. Lifeboats were immediately lowered and lines were strung around the body. Passengers and crew tried to secure the carcass. In the end, though, it proved too heavy or unwieldy and dropped into the water, sinking 600 feet to the bottom of Seneca Lake. The ship reached Geneva after dark, and the passengers began to tell their stories of the incident. While all agreed that a monster had been seen, different versions of the length of the monster from 25 feet to as much as 90 feet strained the credibility of the accounts. The Rochester Herald said that Professor George R. Elwood, the geologist on board, who had been in one of the lifeboats trying to secure the body, gave what was considered the most careful and perhaps most trustworthy account. He thought it was a cladastus, an extinct marine lizard from the mosasaur family that lived in what is now the United States until it disappeared from the fossil record at the end of the Cretaceous period, about 66 million years ago. Now, we can't let skepticism get the better of us, considering that in December of 1938, a South African fisherman caught a coelacanth, which is a fish that was thought to have been extinct and disappeared from the fossil record at the end of the Cretaceous period, 66 million years ago. So it is entirely possible that this thing could have existed. Professor Elwood went on to describe the creature as about 25 feet long, with a tail that tapered until within about 5 feet of the head, which it broadened out and looked much more like a whale. The creature weighed about 1,000 pounds. Its head was perhaps 4 feet long and triangular. Its mouth was very long, and it was armed with 2 rows of triangular white teeth as sharp as those as a shark, but in the shape more like that of a sperm whale. Its body was covered with a horny substance, which was much like the carapace of a terrapin, as anything else of which I know. This horny substance was brown in color and of a greenish tinge. The belly of the creature, which I saw after the rope slipped and the carcass was going down, was cream white. Its eyes were round, like those of a fish, and it did not wink. For years now, what could it have been has been the question that has speculated around the area, and even the country, and now the world. It hardly seems likely that so many people could have imagined something so vivid if there had been nothing there. Lake sturgeon, indigenous to both big lakes, can live to be as old as 100 years, grow to 9 feet long and 300 pounds. Their skin is like a shark-like dull gray. Eels are darker but smaller, not getting much longer than 5 feet. Muskellungi can also get over 5 feet long and weigh 70 pounds. Plus, they have rows of sharp teeth. None are apt to convince a boatload of people that they were in the presence of a 25-foot monster, though. It was suggested by cynics that the whole thing was a hoax perpetuated by the passengers and crew, which is also exceedingly unlikely. Dozens of people would have had to have kept that secret for the rest of their lives, while human nature suggests that no group larger than 3 people can be trusted to reliably keep a secret for a long weekend. The Geneva Historical Society can document at least 20 separate reported sightings of the Seneca Lake monster. Most recently in 2013, Cayuga's Old Greenie has a Facebook page. Clearly, the idea that big lakes harbor mysteries beyond our knowledge is one that is held stubborn and collective in our imagination. It's part of the charm of living in small towns, I would say, especially lake towns. These experiences occurred at Lake Gogebic in Michigan from 1994 to 1996. I've lived in Michigan all of my life and never been interested in moving anywhere else. My family is here. It is and always will be my home. And during the time span, I was accustomed to hiking along the side of the lake where the brush was thin enough to allow me to do so. There was some private property along the shoreline as well that I avoided by cutting through the woods and coming back toward the lake once I passed. I always wondered if people thought I was a bit creepy, just bumbling through the woods. But I did wear a backpack and hiking boots. I'm sure folks that did see me knew what I was doing. Anyway, in 1994, one Saturday morning, I woke up at about 5 when it was still dark out and got my stuff together. I packed some granola bars as I planned to have a peaceful breakfast on the edge of the lake while watching the sunrise. Nothing beats it. After a 30-minute drive, I was exactly where I wanted to be, under a rich canopy, in the faint shadows cast by a rising sun. But something felt different. Something felt wrong. Now before I continue, you must know I had been walking in those woods and next to that lake at least 500 times. I've never once had an eerie feeling while I was out there. But that day, something was different. I felt like I was being watched. At least a dozen times I stopped to listen. I would look around to see no one or anything out of place. Maybe I was still tired or something. Well, I kept on walking, and no longer after, I swear I heard footsteps behind me again. I turned to see who it was, and there was still no one there. The trees were still. There was no wind. I was alone. I started again walking toward the edge of the water. I was starving and ready to have a seat and start eating. And again those footsteps came from behind me. "Who's there?" I called out to the motionless forest that surrounded me. No one replied. Waiting for about 15 minutes, I stood as calmly as I could. But to be honest, I was starting to feel more and more uneasy by the second. After hearing nothing, I took a few steps toward a cozy-looking rock by the bank and sat down. I peeled the wrappers from my breakfast and had at it, taking swigs of bottled water in between bites and whistling a tune here and there. What I didn't expect was to hear someone whistling back to me. I stopped, almost choking on my granola. My body was covered in goose flesh. As I slid around the rock to face the forest, there was still no one there. Now, more curious than afraid, I drank another gulp of water and whistled again. Once more, after a few seconds, the same tune whistled back to me, plain as day. It was either my first time ever hearing an echo out on this lake, or someone hiding in the woods was trying to scare me. One more time, I whistled expecting to pinpoint exactly where this mimicry was coming from. This time, the tune came from directly behind me. I fell forward off the rock and faced the direction it came from while crawling away backward. My heart was pounding out of my chest. All I was able to glimpse was a large splash in the water, and the fleeting ripples thereafter. Without a moment of hesitation, I picked up my backpack and ran toward my truck. I didn't set out for Gogebic again for months. I was still spooked after this weird experience. Eventually, I did start my usual hikes again, and for the longest time, I didn't run into anything weird. One day in 1995, though, I did hear the footsteps again. But the moment I heard it, I turned tail and ran back to my truck. I was not about to chance it with something I couldn't even see. The final experience happened in the spring of 1996. This is the experience that confirmed that whatever was happening wasn't echoes, animals in the woods, or some prankster trying to get me. The following experience left me with nightmares still to this day. I had figured that if I just avoided that side of the lake, it'd be okay. I'd be fine. So this time, I parked my truck on literally the opposite side, and that's a big deal. Gogebic is the largest natural lake in Michigan, so I was miles away from where that other weirdness had happened. That day, I had brought a sketch pad and a set of colored pencils. I had gotten into sketching scenery recently, and using that medium really helped me relax and forget my problems. At least for a moment. I was being extremely quiet. It's not like I was trying to be as quiet as possible, I was just focused and still. When the footsteps came out of nowhere, those all too familiar footsteps. I looked ever so slowly in the direction they were coming from. I expected to see nothing. For so long I've been hearing these footsteps, and for so long I've witnessed them coming from nowhere. Not today. No, this time I saw something, and I can say for sure this was no person. It was standing at the edge of the water, looking out over the lake. It looked hunched over and thin. Skin was pale as the moon. Just the sight of it made my skin crawl. My heart seemed to stop. I prayed and I prayed in my head, hoping this thing would not see me. There was no telling how long that thing had been walking over there for. But, God, even hunched it was so tall. It stood at least 3 feet over me. I did not want to catch this thing's attention. I stayed put. I didn't move, and I barely breathed. For at least 30 minutes, the creature didn't move as it continued to stare at the water. Finally, it walked slowly forward, taking massive steps into the shallow water, before the top of its head disappeared into it. I should have drawn it, but I was too scared to move, and I couldn't make out too much of its face. I continued to sit, waiting and breathing slowly. Underwater or not, it was too soon to start running. I waited another half hour just to be safe. My ass started to ache, and the rock underneath me did not feel good after a while. Eventually, I called it. It was time to get the hell home. ASAP. I slid my sketchbook and pencil case into my bag and stood up. I turned toward the trail. There it was. Not 2 yards in front of my face, it stood staring at me. It was towering over me, yet still standing in the water. The face, God, that face. I finally got a good look at it. It was black, with sunken pits where its eyes should have been. Black, sunken pits where its eyes should have been. There was no nose, just wrinkled pink and pale, almost disgusting blue skin. And where the mouth was meant to be was just an absence of anything. With its lacking eyes, it faced me. It stared at me. I slowly backed away, and yet its empty gaze followed me. I had no other choice. I had to run. It reached out to me with a long, thin finger that had no nails. Before they could reach me, I broke into my fastest possible sprint. I did not turn around. I did not glance over my shoulder. The moment I reached my truck, I opened the door, jumped in, and sped away. Since that day, I have not gone back to Lake Gogabik, and I never plan to. 20 years have passed, and I'm an old man now, and I'm still very much afraid of that place. I do not know what I saw. I don't think I ever will. But I have passed these stories down to my kids and my kids' kids in hopes that they will have some sort of idea of what is out there. No matter how smart people think they are, we do not know everything about our planet. There are creatures that elude us. Believe me, I came face to face with one. My grandparents own a large plot of land in central Missouri, and they have held the land for around 40 years now. I have been to that farm over 10 times, and every time I go, I always get this terrifying feeling that something is watching me, like there's always something behind my back. I have also had many strange encounters there that are downright bizarre. My first encounter with whatever the hell this thing is was when I was around the age of 9. We had brought our dog named Spot to the farm. He was a silver lab who I loved dearly. I explored in the forest behind the house, enjoying the summer breeze when my dog started growling. A deep, sinister growl that I've never heard him make. I turned around quickly to see what he was growling at, but could see nothing but forest along with trees and more trees. While my eyes were scanning the area where my dog was growling, some animal shot out of the brush so fast I could barely see what it was, and before I knew it, it was gone. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, absolutely flabbergasted by what I had just witnessed. From what I could see of it, it looked like a coyote, but the speed of which it was moving was insane. It moved at like 90 miles an hour and made almost zero noise. But the creepiest part is that the place it jumped out of didn't even make an imprint or any sort of footprint. I looked all over to find some sort of evidence that this thing even existed. Shocked by what I witnessed, I just decided that was enough and went back inside the house. My second encounter happened when I was 10 years old. I was visiting the place like usual, and I was getting that feeling that I was being watched. The first day was normal and nothing too creepy happened. I was just trying to spend as much quality time with my family. But when night came, that's when things started happening. I was trying to sleep in a twin bed that was shared by my mom's brother when he used to live there. When I heard tapping, not tiny little taps but loud taps, almost like banging, coming from the direction of the window. I slowly sat up and looked up at the window, but there was nothing that I could see, so I assumed it was just some sort of animal. 5 minutes passed and the tapping had stopped, and I was drifting off to sleep when boom! This is not a tap, but a slam. A loud slam directly into the window. I'm not talking like a hit. It sounded as if something massive hit the window with all of its force. I shot up so quickly that I nearly passed out. I decided enough was enough and grabbed a flashlight in the drawer and shined it out the window. There was nothing. 10 seconds passed and there was still nothing. I was about to go crawl into my mom's bed when I heard a loud screech. A screech that was not achievable by any human. So loud it pierced the quiet, peaceful summer night. I cannot put into words what it sounded like. It was dark and horrible, but I still remember it to this day. I froze. Unable to move muscles, I was so scared. I was sitting there still as a statue, petrified by what I heard. That's when my instincts kicked in and they told me to run into my mom's room, which I did. For some reason, I didn't wake her up, I just cuddled up next to her and didn't sleep the entire night. All I could do is think of that sound, that horrible, bloody screech. My next encounter was when I was at the age of 13, so 3 years later. I was back at my grandparents' just enjoying the time like I usually do, and my grandparents suggested that we go deer watching. I agreed because I had been doing this for as long as I could remember, and I had never had an issue or creepy experience while doing so. It was relaxing and extremely fun. At around 6 or 7 p.m., we decided to go in the most eastern pasture because that's usually where we spotted the most deer. 30 minutes passed and we had seen a few deer, but not as much as we usually do. But then, this is where the real scary stuff begins. I get that feeling again, that dreadful feeling that something is there watching us in the shadows. But this time it's a lot more intense than it ever has been before. Like it's right up behind me, but when I look it's never there. But this time it appears that my grandpa feels the same presence as me too. Just to let all of you know, my grandpa is a very laid-back individual, always joking and having a laugh. The only time I've ever seen him very serious is when my great-uncle died a couple of years ago. So when I start feeling that I'm being watched, my grandpa goes from a happy and laid-back guy with an expression of joy to a very serious and alert expression. He gripped the wheel so tight his knuckles turned white and was constantly looking around to make sure something was not following us. He then made a massive U-turn out of nowhere and started heading back to the house. I asked him what he was doing, and he replied, "We're heading back to the house." The tone of his voice was cold, like he had witnessed someone being murdered. At this point, he was gripping the wheel even harder and was absolutely going pedal to the metal full speed back to the house. I decided not to ask any questions until we got back to the house, which we did in no time at all. Once we were there, he rushed me into the house, constantly checking his back to make sure nothing was there. When we were inside, he closed and locked the door tight. His behavior was very alarming, and it really shocked me to my core. I decided that all the stuff I had witnessed was enough and only asked him one question. What the hell is going on here? When I said that, he looked at me and gave me a cold expression and said, "I have some things I need to explain to you." We then sat down for 30 minutes, and he explained that whatever this thing was living on his property and has been here since the day he moved in, and he and my mother experienced the same thing. He explained that he has seen whatever this thing is countless times, and it does not like new visitors, hence why I was experiencing all of these problems. He told me about all of these things that he had witnessed and experienced, and they seemed to have been pretty much what was happening to me. He then told me that he knew what was going to happen to me, and we were always watching to make sure I never got hurt because he knew this creature better than anyone else. We talked about this for some time. It was now late, and he decided that I couldn't sleep alone, so he slept with me and my mom. We luckily left the next morning, and I have not been back since. This encounter, it really wasn't an encounter, really shook me up though. And my grandparents have now put their farm up for sale and are looking to move. This is a very scary time for everybody, because recently we had a horse that we found 3 10-inch gashes down in their side. Something was clawing at it, trying to get it through the fence. Also around the same time, my grandparents adopted a dog and named it Panda. Panda was a Jack Russell Terrier who was the age of 5. A couple of days later, he was found dead with deep puncture wounds into his body and his neck slashed up. They ruled it out as a bobcat or a lion, but I also think otherwise. I don't know what the hell this thing is, but something tells me that it's no good. We went camping and met something absolutely horrible. By Anonymous. My girlfriend and I went to Marshall Lake in Flagstaff, Arizona, for dispersed camping. The scenery during the day was beautiful, but as soon as the sun went down, it got entirely too cold that we decided to put the fire and retreat to our tent. After the sun had fully set, we settled into our tent and tried to get some sleep, even though it was still early. Please remember that we were in the middle of nowhere, and not a single soul was nearby us, perhaps maybe about 1.5 miles from the closest tent we had even seen. After lying down for 30 minutes or so, my girlfriend and I began to hear footsteps around our tent. We didn't hear anything approaching, and it was as if they conjured and just started right in front of our tent and started moving. We grabbed our bear spray. We decided to peek out the tent to see if there was anything nearby, but there was absolutely nothing out there. We went back to our sleeping bags feeling pretty spooked. However, 15 minutes later, we heard a strange noise and then what sounded like somebody walking around our tent again, but it would start right in front of the tent entrance and then go all the way around clockwise, and never any differently. We would never see any footsteps on the ground, never see any shadows, anything like that. Therefore, we left that place in absolute minutes. We broke down our whole campsite in record time. We hiked out of the woods faster than I ever have, and we eventually reached a motel. We wondered if maybe there were any skinwalkers out there, as we couldn't see any animal tracks behind our tent, and we were confident that we heard footsteps walking around. What do you guys think in the chat? Skinwalker Encounter in Shenandoah by Anonymous. I attend school in Harrisonburg, Virginia, and during the summer of 2023, I was at home with my roommate late at night, around 1 a.m. Our house has 3 floors, and we were in the kitchen on the 2nd floor when we heard a faint moaning sound. Initially, we thought it was our neighbor through the walls, but the sound became more clear and seemed like it was coming from outside, specifically from our front door. It sounded more like a baby crying than anything else. We started moving towards the stairs to listen more closely, but whatever was making the noise seemed to be caused by some scary disturbances and banging on the heavy door. It sounded like somebody was trying to break in, like a dog or some other 4-legged animal. We were freaked out and didn't know what to do. We sat in the living room and this continued for about 30 minutes. After that, the noise started to come and go, but we still couldn't sleep because we were so scared. I wanted to go somewhere else since I lived on the 1st floor. It kept going on and on, so we decided to call the non-emergency phone number for the police. It started to be heavy again as we were on the phone with them, and it sounded like somebody was trying to bust in. So this emergency that wasn't such an emergency turned into something much bigger on the phone call than it should have been. The person on the phone was asking, "Is that the noise you're describing?" And I would again tell them yes, that was. So apparently, the beating on the door was so loud that the person on the other end of the phone could hear it all the way down the hall from the front door. They said they would send somebody, but we have yet to see anybody, and this was days ago. So my roommate and I decided we were fed up. We eventually grabbed a kitchen knife, and so did he. We walked down the stairs. It was scratching and banging as we went down. I got to the door, looked out the peephole, and there was absolutely nothing there. We went back upstairs, and it started again for around 10 minutes, but after that, it stopped. I eventually went downstairs and peacefully went to bed. I woke up the next day and checked outside, and again there was nothing there, no damage to the door, nothing at all. We still think about it, and we are convinced it was a skinwalker. Does anybody have any thoughts on this? Was it a skinwalker? A spirit? Anything else? This next write-up is going to be a little bit different from what we normally do on these types of videos. My good friend Dan A. recently did a presentation on the historical origins, lore and characteristics, cultural significance, and more about the Navajo and skinwalkers. I wanted to share a bit of this for you because I thought you guys would enjoy it and find some value in it. The skinwalker, or Yi-Nad-Lushi, in the Navajo language, is a complex and enigmatic figure deeply rooted in Navajo culture and folklore. Understanding the history, lore, and significance of the skinwalker requires delving into the rich tapestry of Navajo traditions, beliefs, and oral histories. The skinwalker legend has ancient origins and is surrounded by mystery. According to Navajo oral traditions, it emerged as a cautionary tale and to explain unexplainable phenomena, and has been passed down through generations. Though it is difficult to trace its exact historical origins, the idea of evil witches and shape-shifting creatures and other sorts of beings can be found in various indigenous cultures across the world. In Navajo culture, the skinwalker is a wicked witch or a sorcerer who can transform into different animals. They are believed to achieve these powers through performing dark rituals and committing evil deeds, which often involve killing a close relative. Once they gain these abilities, they use them to harm others, spread disease, or seek vengeance upon their enemies. The Skinwalker, according to legends, can transform into any animal. Although they seem to prefer coyotes, wolves, foxes, owls, or crows, the remarkable ability enables them to move around without being detected among their targets, making them especially hazardous and hard to recognize. In addition to their shape-shifting abilities, Skinwalkers possess other supernatural powers, including the ability to control the minds of animals, manipulate the elements, and cast curses or hexes on their enemies. They are also believed to have the power of invisibility and to travel great distances in short amounts of time. The Skinwalker legend holds significant cultural importance within Navajo society, symbolizing fear, respect, and the consequences of wrongdoing. Traditional Navajo teachings emphasize the respect and consequences of every action that you do, the importance of maintaining balance and harmony within the natural world, and respecting the interconnectedness of all living beings. The Skinwalker represents a deviation from these principles, embodying the consequences of greed, jealousy, and the misuse of power. Navajo elders and spiritual leaders often caution against speaking openly about Skinwalkers, as it is believed that acknowledging their existence can attract their attention and invite harm. Stories of encounters with Skinwalkers are shared cautiously, usually within the context of teaching important life lessons and emphasizing the importance of living in harmony with nature and the spirit world. While the belief in Skinwalkers remain deeply ingrained in Navajo culture to this very day, their existence is a matter of spiritual belief rather than empirical evidence. However, encounters with mysterious and unexplained phenomena continue to be reported in Navajo communities, and the legend of the Skinwalker persists as a source of intrigue and fascination for both Navajo people and outsiders alike. In recent years, there has been a resurgence of interest in Navajo folklore and mythology, leading to increased awareness and appreciation of the rich cultural heritage of the Navajo people. Efforts to preserve and promote national and traditional Navajo teachings, including stories of the Skinwalker, are ongoing, ensuring that these ancient legends continue to be passed down for future generations.
When I was younger, I preferred to spend time at my great-grandmother's house rather than my own. Being right next door, my grandmother would often let me spend the night with my great-grandparents to get me out of her hair. My grandparents had their own bedroom on one end of the house, and on the other end was the room which I slept in whenever I visited. This bedroom was big to a 6 or 7-year-old, with a large bed that had sliding glass door cabinets for a headboard, and 2 large windows, one of which had a crate of toys for it, mostly building blocks and the like, that faced the side yard, which had several young pine trees. The other window faced a large barn out back that housed their camper and all manners of other things. Before I continue, I ought to mention that I'm a quarter Native American, of the Miami tribe, to be specific. My mother was adopted by a family whose heritage was distinctly French. While my grandmother wanted my mother and I to have nothing to do with our heritage, my great-grandmother embraced it, but never kept it from us, and even taught us a little bit about it. Me far less than my mother, since I was way too young to understand much before she passed. One night when I was sleeping over at my great-grandma's house, I woke up when the motion-detecting floodlight on the barn out the back turned on. The room was flooded with light, and I could see everything was clear. Unable to go back to sleep, I got up and decided to play with the blocks until the floodlight went out, and I could go back to sleep. For some reason, I felt the strange urge to look out the window into the side yard, so I climbed up on the crate under the window and peered out. There, in the side yard, was a man. He was in his late teens, 17 to 19, with neatly cut straight black hair, nearly ear length. He wasn't dark-skinned, but he wasn't white either. He wore what looked like tan Carhartt overalls and appeared to be examining a young pine tree not 15 feet from the window. The tree wasn't very tall, maybe 8 or 9 feet, but the young man was carefully moving the bottom branches this way and that, as if looking for something. I watched him for a minute or two, simply observing. I didn't feel frightened. Rather, I was curious. Then the young man lifted his head and looked around. When he saw me, the strangest thing happened. He looked startled, almost terrified. His eyes widened so far that I could make out their whites in the low light. There's no other way to explain what occurred after that, other than the crazy sounding. He turned into a deer and bolted away into the darkness. He simply turned to his left, dropped to all fours, and was a deer by the time that he would have hit his hands on the ground. He ran off beyond the barn where I couldn't see. I don't remember the conversation I had with my grandmother about this in the morning, only that she seemed upset and was tight-lipped, and that she and my great-grandfather went out to look for that exact tree later that day. They didn't find anything, and my grandfather didn't want to hear about it anymore. So I shrugged it off. Years later I would learn what skinwalkers are. I would think back to the young man and how he could have been a skinwalker. How his overalls could have been deerskin. I would also think that my experience didn't line up with other skinwalker encounters. I didn't feel any fear. I didn't notice a stench and no one called my name. Also, the young man seemed to be afraid of me. Then again, I suppose if I were looking for something and I saw a small child staring at me out a window, I'd probably be pretty freaked out too. As time went on, I had for the most part convinced myself that I had just happened to have witnessed a teen boy hunting illegally in our property. And my startling him startled the deer he was after, and my child brain just processed it strangely. That is until I decided to bring up the concept of skinwalkers to my mother. I had told her about what I could have possibly seen one day when I was a child, when she said, "Oh, you saw the Birdman too, huh?" My belief that I misremembered a teen boy hunting shattered. She wouldn't say much about it when I seemed confused, simply stating, "Oh, there was an old balding man who would dance around the roof with his belt made of feathers, and when I would go out there to yell at him for being so loud, he'd smile at me and fly off like a bird." So I have been kinda wanting to share my creepy encounters and experiences for a while, but what my sister told me a few days ago made me want to share this possible skinwalker encounter. I'm Native American, and so is my father and siblings. My mom has very little, but there is some. We aren't involved with any tribes, but I do enjoy looking, reading, and trying to be active in Native culture. There are also plenty of tribes in the state that I live in. A few weeks ago, I was asking my dad about the tribes around here and asking if there was a possibility that skinwalkers could be up here. He kinda avoided the question, but did tell me that a tribe up north was notorious for murders, both by members and unexplained ones. I tried seeing if I could get any more answers from him, but he would not give up anything else. Now, time for the actual encounters. Both my sister and I have experienced them the most, but my brother has also had some unexplained scratching and whispering at night. It was rare, but it did happen. The encounters started at the beginning of the summer in 2017. Now, my sister and I share a room. She's always been scared of the dark, so being the nice big brother I am, I have shared a room with her. Anyways, it was around maybe 11 p.m. when I and my sister heard a weird sound. It sounded like a bird call, but definitely not normal. It sounded like someone with strep throat was trying to mimic a crow. Both me and my sister kinda just looked up from our phones and gave each other a weird look. We live in an apartment complex that's located on the edge of a small town. The town is a druggie town, so for like the first hour, we thought it was just some druggie outside tripping out. But it lasted about 3 hours or so, only ending around 2 a.m. My sister had fallen asleep and everything was quiet, but then I heard the big dogs down the road start barking like crazy. I thought it was just some weird timing or they saw an animal, but looking back, I think it might have been the first time this skinwalker visited me. A few weeks go by, and the same sound starts at around 10 p.m. or 11 p.m., and would usually end at around 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. At first, I and my sister didn't really pay attention to it, and eventually thought it was actually a weird bird. But one night, I had slept over at my friend's house, which was a trailer on the edge of the town right near mine. I and my friend were just about to fall asleep on the couches when I heard that same sound. I sat straight up and looked at my friend. "You heard that, right?" I asked her, thinking it was imaginary. "Yeah, it sounded like a bird. Why?" She told me back, probably thinking I was crazy. "Oh, it's nothing. I just hear that a lot." I replied back. If I told her, she probably would have not believed me, but I just tried to make it seem like nothing. That night, the sound lasted until I fell asleep. Fast forward another week, and we're hearing the same sounds at night still. My sister now was starting to get paranoid. I was too, but I just told her it was nothing, just a dumb bird. At this point, in the summer, I was listening to lots of Skinwalker stories and started connecting their similarities to what was happening to me. One night, my sister and I were just chilling in our beds with our window open when the noises started up again. This time, they sounded more ragged and sick. They stopped pretty quickly after they started. I and my sister just shrugged at each other. We went back to our phones when suddenly right next to our window we hear the most blood-curdling scream. It wasn't human. It sounded like a baby screams crossed with a dog yelping. With that sound ringing in our ears, me and my sister both jumped and screamed, hiding under her covers. I honestly hid under my covers as well. With my heart racing, we waited for what seemed like hours until my sister whisper yelled at me, asking if it was safe. I had to put my big boy pants on and uncover to close the window. I did so rather quickly. When I got to the window, nothing was there. My sister wanted to tell our parents, but I knew they would not believe us. The next day, though, I had asked if they had heard anything, which they said they hadn't. I brought this stuff up to my 3 friends one night while having a sleepover. At first, most of them thought it was a joke, but then I explained how I felt I was always being followed and having a sense of dread 24/7. They seemed to believe me, and I told them that I thought something had followed me and was even following me to their houses. What freaked us all out was that night, my friend's dog started barking and growling like crazy. Afterward, one of my friends had remarked, "Why did we become friends with a Native American?" It made us laugh and calm the atmosphere for the rest of the night. Back home, my sister had told me that the noises stopped while I was gone, which pretty much had confirmed to me that it was indeed following me. Constantly now, I was feeling dread and couldn't sleep at night. That scream ringing in my ears and the sound outside increasing each night, sounding more and more sickly. As I said, this had been lasting all summer, so eventually we got used to it. Sometimes it sounded like there was more than one, but as long as it didn't get worse, we didn't care. At my friend's house, it was still the same, paranoid about seeing it, but even walking my dogs at night freaked me out because their gaze would fixate on something in the tree line, just outside of my sight. They wouldn't bark or anything, just stare, then start sprinting towards home. I'd follow, gripping the leash so they wouldn't get away. It really freaked me out. One night, I caught a glimpse of it through the curtain rack. The noise had gotten closer. Me and my sister were prepared to hear another one of those terrible screams, but no. I looked out the window as the wind blew in. I saw what I believe was the Skinwalker. It looked so sickly and thin, its eyes sunken, and its face looked like it was scowling. I just stared at it until the curtain moved back and then it was gone. The dread had filled me even more. After that, we heard less and less. Toward the end of summer, we heard it again, and I decided to record the sound, but I guess I forgot to actually hit the record button because I can't find it on my device. I wish there was a way to be able to not have these technical difficulties. Everything has died down recently, though. I still have a constant feeling of dread, though, and I'm more and more paranoid by the week. It's all just super freaky and weird. I'm already kind of paranoid as it is, but this is all too weird, and it can't just be a coincidence. I just hope it stops, and I'd love to get a good night's sleep. My apologies, because I'm definitely not a writer, so I'm just gonna try to tell you my story exactly how it happened. And if you have any answers or explanations, please let me know. For some basic background information, I'm 16 and I live in the western United States, and I am active in rodeo. This happened in late winter. My brother and a close friend, who for the sake of the story we will call T, got permission from a local reservation to use their arena to practice roping. We got there early in the morning, so we would have all the time we needed. Now, mind you, my brother's horse and T's are both very even-tempered and don't spook very easily. My mare, on the other hand, will panic at the littlest of things. She can be a handful most of the time, to be quite honest. Since the moment we got there, all of our horses seemed to be on edge. We shrugged it off and figured once they got to know their surroundings a bit more, they should be fine. After spending the better part of the day throwing ropes and chasing cattle, we decided to go for a ride on the trail and explore the area. By now, the horses seemed to have calmed down quite a bit. There is a river that ran close to the arena, so we decided to go explore down and check down to the river and give the horses a drink. Once we got about 30 yards away from the water, we could smell what could only be described as a rotting dead animal. Then something in the tree line caught the attention of all the horses, and after that, mine flat out refused to go any further. Being tired from a long day and frustrated by my horse's lack of cooperation, we all decided to call it a day. By this time, it was too late to load our gear and horses and take them back, so we decided it was just best to leave them there for the night and stay at T's because she lived closer to my brother than I. We got their stalls ready for the night, got them fed and watered, and headed over to one of T's family friends who offered to cook us dinner. After some good food, good laughs, and a few good games of pool, the weird encounter by the river was out of mind. When 9 o'clock rolled around, we all wanted to get some sleep, but I wanted to check on the horses one last time before we left, and when I mentioned this to T, his family friend warned me not to go there alone at night. Wanting to respect that, T offered to drive down with me. We got in the truck and headed back to the arena. It was only about a half-a-mile drive, but the road was very icy, so we had to drive slower than what I thought would have, been possible, to be honest. Before crossing the bridge that went over the river, this feeling of dread hit me like a ton of bricks. I looked out the window just to be met with those glowing, yellow eyes I will never forget. They are hard to describe. There was not enough light hitting them to make them glow the way they did. I am normally a very rational person, but something in my gut told me that this thing was very wrong. That's when T turned to me and said, "Do you smell something bad, or is it just me?" At that point, I hadn't even noticed anything, honestly. When I didn't respond, she looked at me, then met my gaze just to see the same yellow-eyed glare that I was fixated on. We were both in terror, not knowing what this thing was. Where it sat, it looked like it could have been at least 8 feet tall, and there are no animals in their parts that large. I finally came to my senses and hit the gas, and our truck started sliding, but we cut traction and made our way back to the arena. When we pulled up, the headlight hit the horses. The very first thing I noticed was my mare hadn't even touched her food, and for her, that's very out of the ordinary, because she's kind of a pig and normally eats more than her fair share. The other two hadn't eaten either, which again we found very odd, but being scared and cold, we got back in the truck and drove back without incident. We got to T's at about 11, and as soon as our heads hit the pillows, we were out like a light. All of a sudden, I woke up to my brother grabbing my arm and shaking me. I asked him what was wrong. He just put his finger over his mouth and pointed to the window. There was a tapping on the glass, and occasional scratching. I looked at the clock and it was 3 a.m. T and I hadn't told him about our encounter on the bridge, but it was late and I wasn't going to tell him now and scare him even more. Trying to be rational, I told him just to ignore it and try to get some sleep, but knowing what had happened, I was convinced it was the thing from the reservation and it had followed us back. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, and as soon as the sun was up, I woke up T and my brother so we could go get our horses and get home. because I wanted my poor girl out of there and no longer with that thing. I told T about the tapping and scratching, so after coffee we went to look by our window for tracks, and sure enough, there was what looked like deer hooves, but they didn't track like normal deer. It was as if it was bipedal. This spooked us, but we just wanted to go see if our horses were okay, so we headed back to the reservation. They were all fine, but the food and water were still untouched. We got loaded up and out of there as fast as we could. As we drove over the bridge one last time, I looked into the tree line just to see a massive buck staring at me. He was large, and I mean unnaturally large. Very, very sickly looking though at the same time. His skin was just falling from his bones, and his legs bent the wrong way. That wasn't even the worst part though. His face. Those same ungodly yellow eyes. But when I made eye contact, I swear this thing, whatever it was, smiled at me with the most sickening smile I'd ever seen, with those yellow, pointed teeth.
Tyler State Park Creature by Tachanka Sausage. Living in rural Pennsylvania, nestled near the picturesque Tyler State Park, has always offered me moments of serenity amidst the chaos of my everyday life. My name is Tom, and Tyler State Park has been my sanctuary for as long as I can remember. It's a haven for horseback riding and leisurely walks, and I often bring along my faithful companion, Lola, for company. One of the highlights of my time at the park is riding Irish Red, a magnificent chestnut horse owned by my buddy John, a seasoned veteran who owns the White Pine Horse Farm nearby. Despite his age and hip injury from his service days, John's dedication to his farm and horses never wavers. In exchange for helping the chores around the farm, John graciously allows me to ride Irish Red pretty much whenever I want. One exceptionally mild morning in February, I decided to skip my average horseback ride and take a leisurely walk through the park instead. The sun was just starting to shine its golden light on the surroundings, hinting at day full of peacefulness and excitement. Walking along the familiar trails, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The woods usually are so welcoming, but today they seemed to be whispering secrets, and shadows danced among the trees. Then, I spotted a figure on the opposite bank of the river. It looked like a lone man clad in nondescript clothing, his presence sending a chill down my spine. As I sat in the park, I began to feel uneasy when I noticed a glint of metal in the man's hand. It was a gun, and seeing it in a public place made me a lot more uncomfortable. I decided to call out to him, hoping to understand the reason behind his unsettling presence. However, he didn't respond and stared at me chillingly, making my blood run cold. Fear gripped me like a vice in that moment, and I turned around to flee. But before I could make my escape, I heard something that confirmed my worst fears. I heard him raise the gun, and his intentions were clear. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I ran for my life. The sound of gunfire echoed behind me through the forest. In a desperate bid for safety, I jumped to the ground, reaching for my phone and dialing John's number, my voice trembling as I recounted the harrowing encounter. His reassuring words offered a sliver of hope amidst the chaos, guiding me through the tumultuous ordeal with unwavering support. As I navigated the labyrinth of trees and undergrowth, my heart pounded in my chest, each footstep a reminder of danger lurking beyond the shadows. But when the moment of reckoning came, I refused to cower. I confronted my assailant head-on, drawing upon a wellspring of courage I never knew I possessed. Ultimately, it was a battle of wills, a clash between fear and fortitude, and when the dust settled and the echoes of violence faded into the distance, I emerged victorious, my resolve unbroken by the trials of that fateful day. Reflecting on the experience in the safety of my home, I realized the importance of vigilance and resilience in the world fraught with uncertainty. But amidst the darkness, there is always a light, a beacon of hope guiding us through the darkest nights. I continue, my faith in humanity strengthened by the kindness of strangers and the resilience of my spirit. I don't know what was going on that day. I don't know why that guy shot at me. I don't know why I didn't get hit by the bullet, but I can tell you one thing. I never ran, and I never escaped so hard in my life. So, when you're out there in state parks, just be careful when you're solo hiking. You never know who or what you might run into. In the archives of unsolved mysteries, few tales evoke as much intrigue and fascination as the disappearance of John Odom in the remote and rugged terrain of the Mokelumne Wilderness. Nestled within California's Sierra Nevada mountain range, this pristine wilderness is known for its breathtaking vistas, dense forest, and challenging trails. Yet, beneath its serene facade lies a sinister enigma that has baffled investigators and haunted the imaginations of countless adventurers. John Odom, a seasoned outdoorsman with a penchant for exploration, set out on a solo backpacking trip into the heart of the Mokelumne Wilderness on a crisp autumn morning. Armed with his trusty gear and an adventurous spirit, he embarked on what was intended to be a routine journey through nature's splendor. Little did he know, though, that this excursion would plunge him into the depths of an inexplicable disappearance that would confound search parties and ignite a frenzy of speculation. The journey began innocuously enough, with John traversing well-worn trails that meandered through towering conifers and meadows adorned with vibrant wildflowers. The crisp mountain air invigorated his senses, and the untamed beauty surrounding him stirred his soul. As he ventured deeper into the wilderness, he encountered a few fellow travelers, relishing the solitude that enveloped him like a comforting shroud. Days turned into nights, and John pressed onward, his determination unyielding despite the challenges posed by rugged terrain and unpredictable weather. Yet as the sun dipped below the horizon on the fourth day of his expedition, something inexplicable occurred. John failed to check in with his loved ones, as he had diligently done each and every evening, sparking concern among his family and friends who awaited his progress. The ensuing days saw a frantic search effort launched by local authorities, aided by volunteers and specialized rescue teams. Helicopters buzzed overhead, scouring the vast expanse of the wilderness with infrared cameras and searchlights. At the same time, ground teams combed through dense undergrowth and rocky outcroppings in a desperate bid to locate any trace of the missing hiker. Despite exhaustive efforts and the deployment of advanced search techniques, the wilderness yielded no clues to where John's whereabouts may be. His tent was discovered intact, nestled among the trees near a babbling brook, its contents undisturbed save for the absence of its occupant. Puzzlingly, there were no signs of a struggle or foul play, leaving investigators perplexed and grasping at straws as to what the heck happened. It didn't look like a wild animal attacked, didn't look like humans had even been here either. What could have happened? As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the search gradually waned, and John's fate slipped into the realm of speculation and conjecture. Theories abounded, ranging from encounters with wildlife to accidental falls or voluntary disappearances. Yet, none offered a satisfactory explanation for the baffling circumstances surrounding his vanishing. Rumors swelled among the locals, whispering tales of otherworldly phenomenon and these evil spirits that had purportedly haunted the depths of the Mokelumne Wilderness for centuries. Some spoke of spectral figures that roamed the forest at night, luring unsuspecting travelers into the embrace of the unknown. Others speculated about hidden portals or vortexes that could whisk away a person to dimensions beyond comprehension. Others mentioned UFOs and aliens and substance of that. In the absence of concrete evidence, such conjectures seemed fanciful and even far-fetched at times. Yet, they underscore the profound mystery that surrounded John Odom's disappearance, leaving a lingering sense of unease among those who dared to venture into the untamed wilderness. The enigma of John Odom's fate remains unsolved, a haunting reminder of the mysteries hidden within the heart of nature's most remote sanctuaries. His name echoes through the annals of history, a testament to the enduring allure and the unfathomable depths of the Mokelumne Wilderness, where reality and myth intertwine in a tapestry of intrigue and uncertainty. In the fall of 2016, a friend and I decided to go hiking late in the afternoon in a densely wooded wilderness area in a state park in the mountains not far from Fayetteville, Arkansas. My friend Rick was close to 60 at the time and recovering from a triple bypass he had undergone around 16 months earlier. We had been hiking this and other trails for about a year following his operation to strengthen his cardiovascular health. That day, a weekday, I hiked with a bottle of water, my wallet, and my keys, but nothing else. Nothing to protect myself. The trail we picked was popular and usually had a lot of people hiking on the weekend. We have hiked this spot dozens of times before. We were both comfortable with the hike and had never had any problems on the path, or any other for that matter. While Rick is older, and at the time a little feebler after his health problems, I was in my mid-40s, well over 6 feet tall, and in fairly good shape, so I was not very worried about our safety. The trail we were on is in a state park adjacent to federal parkland. It is an outdoor enthusiast's dream. Most of our trek that day was completely uneventful. We just enjoyed the autumn leaves and chatted casually as the sun dropped lower in the evening sky. We had seen nobody else that day, which was probably to be expected given that we chose to hike late afternoon on a weekday. We had completed about 4 miles of the 6-mile loop, and up to that point, it was an uneventful time as any other. On our way back to the car, and about 2 miles away from the parking area, we spotted someone. We saw them through an opening in the trees. I saw a young woman, probably a college student on the trail ahead of us, moving in our direction. At first, I paid her extraordinarily little attention. As the distance between us disappeared, that changed. I did not know her, so I could have been mistaken, but there was something about her posture and expression that just seemed off. As she got closer, it struck me that she had a semi-panicked look on her face as she was moving quite quickly. She was in athletic gear, so maybe she was just booking it for some cardio. She occasionally turned her head and stared over her shoulder though. I followed her eyes and eventually noted another human about 50 yards behind her walking up the path through the trees. This second woman was not wearing any hiking gear. In fact, her clothing struck me as totally inappropriate. It was a warm afternoon, and we were well inside a wooded state park, a couple of miles from any homes, but she was wearing semi-formal, offish casual attire and a light jacket. I thought the clothes must have been secondhand because they were tattered, ill-fitting, and did not look washed at all. She was fit and athletic looking, who could not have been more than 25 or 30 years of age. It was so bizarre. The clothes were wrong for the trail, and they were wrong for someone her age. Everything was off about her. Her shoes struck me as odd, being even more peculiar. When she got closer, I noticed she was wearing scuffed leather flats, casual shoes with no ankle support. I found it completely odd because you do not just see people on trails dressed as she was, and you never see them wearing shoes like that. My hiking partner, Rick, had not noticed anything apparently, as he was completely involved in the conversation and just kept on talking. The second woman briefly glanced up and made eye contact as she neared us. The alarm bells went off in my head like no other. There was something in her eyes that made me feel uncomfortable. I do not know what she was thinking if I am being honest, but I swear, she had contempt in her face. Part of me wondered if I had offended her by staring, so I diverted my eyes and kept walking. I tried to tell myself that maybe she was homeless, maybe she was just wearing the only thing she had, and I was just being rude. But the warning bells were still going off in my head like sirens. I am not a paranoid person at all, so having a sixth sense go off in my head left me very unsettled. I have fantastic peripheral vision, so I turned my face toward Rick and acted like I was listening to him, but I was watching the creepy woman out of the corner of my eye. The moment we passed, she spun her head around to study us. She slowed her pace a bit. My internal alarms grew louder. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her come to a stop and drop her face toward the ground. Her body half turned on the trail. It was very odd behavior. Rick and I kept walking for about 50 yards further. We made it around a bend in the path, and I looked back at the woman before the trees obscured her from view. She was just standing there. Her face was down, but she was staring a hole through us in the corner of her eyes. That was the first time I realized that I could not see her hands. One was inside her jacket pocket, and the other was hidden from my view on the other side of her body. It creeped me the hell out. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. For half a mile, I did not see her again, and had begun to wonder whether the first woman, the co-ed, had felt danger as well. Clearly she had, I thought, and that is why she practically was running through the woods at dusk. It also struck me that the creepy woman had stopped and studied Rick and me, like she was deciding whom to follow. We were not moving as fast. We were walking as quickly as Rick could manage, and he was clearly feebler than the co-ed. Those thoughts amped up my senses, and I still felt uneasy, so I periodically checked behind us. At certain points through the woods, I could see more than 100 yards, and I never saw anything. I began to worry about the co-ed. My hair stood up for a second time as I felt the strangest sensation of being watched. Again, thinking I was paranoid, and half mocking myself for being afraid of the creepy woman, I turned my head around to assure myself she was not there. I was wrong. She was there, following with her head down and moving briskly about 100 yards behind us. But with her hands hidden, I turned my head back to the trail in front of us, and we kept walking, still trying to convince myself that there was nothing out of the ordinary happening, that I was just being rude because she was dressed like a homeless woman. About 200 yards further along the path, I turned my head back to Rick and my heart raced a bit. She closed the distance by half or more. Each time we would walk around the bend and the woods obscured her location, she would emerge much closer to us on the next opening. I told myself that I was just being paranoid, but nevertheless trying to get Rick to pick up his speed just a little bit. By this time, he was clearly aware that we are being followed, and he was uncomfortable as well, though to his credit he did keep talking. With a half mile to go before we reached the parking area, I turned my head once again, and she was just 10 feet behind us. I had not seen or heard her get that close, and it freaked me out. I literally jumped out of my skin. One of her hands was in her pocket, and the other was behind her back. I got the distinct feeling that she had a weapon of some kind, and that she had no fear of me even though I was considerably taller, albeit several years older. There was no mistaking her demeanor. She meant to do us harm, or at the very least she intended to intimidate us. I weaved my car keys between my knuckles in my right hand. I handed my water bottle to Rick, and made an obvious fist with my hand. With a half mile left in our hike, I thought to myself, if this is nothing, she'll pass us and move on, as clearly she is moving a lot faster than we were. I was accustomed to people overtaking us when I walked with Rick, but she did not pass, and never acted like she knew we were there, which was the creepiest part. I kept my head turned toward her as I walked and tried to get her to make eye contact, but she did not look me in the eyes at first. She kept acting like neither Rick nor I were there on the path, just a few feet ahead of her. She had slowed to follow closely behind. I was completely unnerved, and that made me angry. I wanted her to see how upset I was, and to convey with a look that messing with me was a mistake. When she finally did make eye contact with me, I glared with clenched fist. There was an instant where I could not read her expression. She was simply blank. But as she studied my face, she appeared to be simultaneously agitated and a little less confident. I was conveying one thing in the look of my face: back the hell off. And at this point, I did not care if it appeared rude. She apparently thought better of whatever she was doing and slowed her pace so that the distance between us began to grow to about 20 feet. But she was tense and kept whatever she had in her hand very closely hidden behind her back. I never saw her hands this entire time. I know she had to have some kind of weapon, and I believe that she meant to do us harm. but I also know she recognized that I was ready to fight. I was mentally preparing to charge at her if I saw a gun or a knife, as I knew Rick could not outrun her. I thought to myself, I might just surprise her. I also realized that I needed to have her in front of us. A few hundred feet further, about a quarter mile away from where we were parked, she's still stalking us, and I had had enough. I was in equal measures afraid and furious. I told Rick that we were going to stop and let her pass, loud enough for her to hear it. Just as I was getting ready to stop on the trail and make her walk in front of us, she veered into a small clearing, plowing through the waist-high brush, crossed a ditch, and scurried through a tree line of trees to a road that ran through the woods and between the main road and the parking area. I kept my eyes on her the whole time. She had a car. It was parked alongside this little service road, partially hidden by shrubs, not in the parking lot. The last time we made eye contact just before she climbed into her car, it was clear from her expression on her face she was incredibly angry. I glared at her, expressing my own anger, but kept walking. When her car started and she drove away, Rick got quiet before asking me, what in the hell was she doing? Did she have a gun? I told him I did not know. I never saw a weapon. We walked back to our car without saying another word. Once the engine was on and the doors were shut, we chatted a bit more about this weird situation and decided to call the authorities and report the incident, just to make sure that they have it on record and to maybe have them check on the poor co-ed who had passed us first. To this day, I have no idea what that creepy woman was doing and what she was planning on doing to us. Maybe she was going to rob us, harm us, scare us, I have no idea. I am just thankful she decided better of it. I have hiked that trail more than 50 times since then, and I've never seen her again. This happened to me during my yearly campout at Lake Texoma in North Texas. The lake itself was built during the Second World War using mainly German prisoners of war. It sits outside the Texas-Oklahoma border and covers roughly 89,000 acres and sees about 6 million visitors on an average year. It is, to my knowledge, still one of the biggest reservoirs in the country and my favorite place to spend my birthday. Every year, the week before or after spring break, I load up my camping supplies into my car and make the 30-mile drive. My usual place to set up is Eisenhower State Park, located on the Texas side of the border and just happens to be named after Dwight D. Eisenhower, the famous World War II general and president who was born nearby. The cool thing about the park is that, for a small fee, I can take my pick of spots that offer running water and electrical connections. Although I normally camp in a relatively traditional manner, having access to power nearby can be convenient. Perhaps the best part of camping, so early in the season, the temperatures are still reasonable. You could go out as little as 2 months later and already be nearing 90+ degrees during the hottest part of the day. This also means there are far fewer other campers in the park. I've been visiting the lake since before I can remember, honestly. As a matter of fact, one of my earliest memories is me bawling my head off and holding my bloody foot that I hurt. My dad sped our boat to shore for me to go get medical care, after stepping on a broken bottle. We all wore shoes in the water after that from then on. In all my years of going out there, I had never heard anything about wild packs of dogs roaming the area. While groups of wild pigs have been an ever-growing problem in our state, wild dogs, not so much. Or maybe that is just my ignorance showing and it is a bigger deal than I'm aware of. Whether it is or not, I was not expecting what happened my second night. I believe that evening, no one else was within a mile of my camp. It was just starting to get dark, and I walked a few feet down to the water. Oftentimes, I would sit on the shore and watch boats across the lake with a cup of coffee and enjoy the calming sounds of the waves looking lightly at the shore. It had not gotten completely dark yet, but the shapes I noticed approaching me were unidentifiable. As they grew closer, I could make out the shape of 2 dogs walking slowly down the shore. I figured they belonged to another camper and called out to let them know I was there. As the seconds passed, no answer came and the dogs continued to get closer. While I am not, nor have I ever been afraid of dogs, I do practice common sense measures with those I'm unfamiliar with. When they were within about 10 yards of me, I see 3 more dogs of varying sizes come down the cliff at an angle, and joined the other two on the bank. My caution was beginning to shift into fear. Odds are that if a group of dogs forms a pack without the moderation or influence of a human, they become feral and can be very dangerous to any people they meet. I was honestly the only person on this night that I've even seen around the area, and I definitely didn't want my night to get any worse than it already was. Running away would just engage their prey drive and I would be run down and mauled for sure. With no other choice, I stood still as they approached me. The two larger dogs I had seen first began to smell me. I did not move or pet them as they did so. While the leader sniffed, the other dogs began to surround me and walk slowly toward me. Even if I had never feared dogs before, this freaked me out. During this whole interaction, I did my best to not identicate that I was scared, but the closer the three came, the more nervous I grew. Things would come to a head when I felt one of them bump me on my back. I did the worst thing I possibly could have and jerked away. This was all the pack needed to begin attacking me. Each of the leaders had grabbed me, one on the hand and the other had a mouthful of my leg. The rest had ganged up and took a firm grip on my right leg. This was not some rough play either. I could tell they were trying to pull me down to the ground. I quickly lost my balance and dropped to one knee, but fortunately for me, I had a makeshift walking stick in my right hand and used it to break my fall. One of the leaders used this as an opportunity to go for my face. However, I foresaw something like this and jabbed it with my stick before it reached me. This gave me the time I needed to get myself back to standing mode. With a firmer stance, I started jabbing at the others. A few let go and backed off, only to renew their attack seconds later. Rage and frustration began to take over me, and I started swinging wildly at them. Here and there, I would hear a screech come from the darkness until finally, the assault ceased. I stood my ground and waited for it to begin again, but the pounding of my heart was all I could hear. To be safe, I walked slowly back up the hill to my camp, watching the whole time for any movement in the darkness. When I reached it, I turned up my lamps and searched for wounds. My left hand was bloody after washing it. I could see that it was not that bad. The bad bites were to the back and sides of my calves. The best I could do was clean them up and wrap them up until I could get to home. The gates did not close until 10 p.m. that day, so the ambulance was able to scoop me up and get me to a hospital rather easily. I spent the rest of the evening getting treated. Among the procedures was my first set of rabies shots. I was overjoyed to learn the procedure is far less extreme than it was when I was a kid. Although you still must get the vaccine over several appointments, science has made major strides in this area. The following morning, I called a friend to pick me up and take me out back to my camp. I obviously needed to go down there and break down everything. I made sure to notify the office about the attack, but I do not know if anything was ever done. I watched the evening news and checked the papers for 2 weeks, but nothing about the dog packs or my attack was ever mentioned. For all I know, the decision was made to handle the problem quietly and avoid any hits to the coming tourist season. The last few times I have camped there since the attack, I have not encountered any feral dogs, so perhaps that it was just a one-time thing. My run-in with the dogs motivated me to finally get my license to carry a handgun though. It was something I had been wanting to do since the law was passed, but I could never justify it to myself. In addition to carrying while about and about in the public, concealed to prevent any problems with the general population, I am legally allowed to bring my pistol along with me when I go camping. Since I believe self-protection is a right, I probably would have had it with me whether it was legal or not, but thankfully, I do not have to take that chance. My goal by sharing this story is not to create fear among others who would love staying in the outdoors and especially our lovely state parks. I simply want to remind people that even in places when we feel comfortable, the unexpected can happen. So, if you are ever visiting Texas, I highly recommend Lake Texoma and the attractions around it. Just be sure you wear your life jacket when you are on the water, do not drink too much, and keep your eyes open for the creatures who share the land with you. Whether they are rattlesnakes or feral dogs, one misstep or loss of concentration could really ruin your day. This is a warning for anybody living or visiting Fairbanks, Alaska. Avoid the eastern side of the Farmers Loop. and avoid Sheep Creek Road at night. Roughly about 10 years ago, I saw my first monster and I was driving home from the hospital with my mom. We lived in the middle of the Farmer's Loop. Since the hospital was closer to the eastern side, we took that side home. Almost right after turning on to Farmer's Loop, there is a clearing. Some may call it a field due to its size, but it's just a clearing. There is a big metal tower in the middle, surrounded by a forest in case you want to look for it. I was in the passenger seat, and it was dark that night, so my mom had the brights on in the car, and that's when we saw it. We were about to drive away from the clearing as we passed by the forest. At first, we mistook it for a dog, but as it emerged from the ditch and into the light, we were struck with absolute terror. It was a sight that haunts me to this day. A half-naked figure, crawling on all fours, its pale skin glowing in the darkness. My mother's screams filled the car as she accelerated, and I, just a mere child at the time, was absolutely overcome with fear. As we drove by it, this thing lifted its head and I saw its grotesque face. There were no eyes. It just had black holes where they should be. There was no mouth, but I could have sworn it was trying to smile. We only talked about it in the car that night, but I can't ever remember her bringing it up again. I have tried to bring it up to her, but she always says that she just doesn't remember. However, there's a look in her eyes that I can tell that she knows exactly what I'm talking about, and she probably knows what it is. That's part of the reason that we tend to avoid the Farmer's Loop. There is also a feeling that lingers on the eastern side of that road. It's almost like a poison. I have never seen a place transform like that segment of road. Before, it was filled with happy people who led good lives. Now it's filled with people who fake happiness, but you can tell something is just off. There's also a homeless camp out there called Dead Man's Cemetery, and you should definitely avoid it. If you go out there late at night, there is a man who stands by the road and just stares you down while wielding a machete. After 10 years of no monsters and almost being convinced that nothing wrong had happened over the last 10 years, something happened tonight that proved to me that the poison was genuine. I decided to go for a late night drive to that forest, which took me past that university and down Sheep Creek Road. A big flash of light was past the university, almost like an explosion. I thought of it when the next one came. 2 minutes later, the next flash hit. My car's tire light came on. It's been having some issue for a while now, so I decided just to turn back, go back to Fairbanks, and grab some air for the tire. I came around a bend looking for a spot to turn around. I saw the reason for the flashes of light. Beyond the hill, I could see lightning, but it didn't seem normal. About 6 of them were coming out of the sky from the same exact spot and then curving towards the ground before going outwards and touching down in random places. I thought it was weird and got my tire aired up. After getting air in the tire, I decided I was way too curious to go home and ignore the flash. So, like the idiot I am, I went back. The light flashes were coming every 3 minutes, and more people than I had ever seen were leaving their homes on Sheep Creek. I don't know what was going on. When I went around the bend from earlier, it got dark, and I don't mean middle of the night darkness. It was so dark you couldn't even see the road in front of you with your high beams on. The trees from that lightning bolt or whatever you could see were burned every time they were touched by it. However, I kept driving. Right before the main train tracks, when I was facing the hills the lightning touched down on, there was another flash. Except this one was big enough to light up the sky, and I could almost see everything like it was daytime. The light lasted maybe 10 seconds at most, and I could see what looked like the shape of a person in the lightning. From where I was, I could make out arms, legs, a torso, and a head. But after that, there were no more freaking flashes. I freaked out, and I raced home. So here I am writing this to you, and trying to warn people. Fairbanks, don't take those roads at night. You may come across a monster with no eyes, or the person in the lightning, and I'm pretty sure they are not friendly. The Katyn Massacre stands as a chilling testament to the depths of human cruelty and the horrors of war. In the spring of 1940, amid the dense forest of Katyn, a sinister plot unfolded, leaving nearly 22,000 Polish officers and others dead in a brutal, harrowing display of calculated barbarity. As the world was embroiled in the chaos of World War II, Poland found itself torn asunder by the dual onslaught of Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact signed in a shadowy corridor of power in August 1939. This stands as a chilling testament to the betrayal and cynicism that lurk within the hearts of men. Crafted in the crucible of geopolitical ambition, this unholy alliance between the two of the 20th century's most brutal dictators unleashed a tidal wave of devastation and despair upon the world. At its very core, the pact was a diabolical pact between Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union and Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany, an agreement born not out of friendship or mutual respect, but out of a cold, calculated pursuit of power and dominance. Behind closed doors, Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov and German Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop hammered out the details of this absolutely insane bargain that would shape history in not the brightest of ways. Central to the pact was the sinister division of Eastern Europe into spheres of influence, a grotesque carve-up of sovereign nations that condemned millions to a fate worse than death. Poland, already reeling from the onslaught of German aggression, found itself caught in a vice grip of betrayal as both Nazi and Soviet forces descended upon its borders with ruthless efficiency. But the horrors unleashed by the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact did not end there. The pact heralded an era of darkness and despair for Eastern European peoples. In the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, the Red Army swept across the land like a relentless tide, crushing all opposition in its path and subjecting the populace to a reign of terror and oppression. The Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east, swiftly overpowering its defenses and annexing large swaths of territory. Among those captured were thousands of Polish military officers, policemen, and other members of the intelligentsia. Rounded up and transported to various prison camps across Soviet-occupied territories, these men became pawns in a sinister game of political expediency. In the spring of 1940, the Soviet secret police, the NKVD, carried out a meticulously planned operation to eradicate the Polish elite. Under the guise of special procedures, the prisoners were transported to the depths of the Katyn forest. They were subjected to a chillingly efficient execution. Bound and blindfolded, the victims were lined up at the edges of mass graves, their final moments shrouded in terror and despair. The crack of gunfire echoed through the trees as execution squads carried out their grim task with ruthless precision. One by one, the lifeless bodies of Poland's finest fell into the waiting earth, their hopes and dreams extinguished in a torrent of violence. But unfortunately, the horrors did not end here. In a macabre display of psychological warfare, the Soviet authorities sought to conceal their crimes by attributing the massacre to the Nazis. During the Nuremberg trials, which were a series of military tribunals held after World War II to prosecute prominent leaders of Nazi Germany, the Katyn massacres were indeed mentioned. The Soviet Union had accused the Nazis of the massacre, but evidence emerged during the trials that implicated the Soviet Union authorities instead. The Nuremberg trials brought international attention to the atrocities committed by both the Nazis and the Soviets during the war. While the main focus was prosecuting Nazi war criminals, the trials also shed light on other war crimes and human rights violations committed by different parties during the conflict. The revelation about the massacre in Katyn Forest at the trials underscored World War II's complex and often overlooked dynamics highlighting the brutality and political motivations of multiple actors involved in the conflict. It wasn't until 1990, with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the opening of long-sealed archives, that the full extent of the Katyn massacre was finally revealed. The discovery sent shockwaves around the world, laying bare the depths of Soviet depravity and forcing a reckoning with a dark chapter of Poland's history. As the Soviet Union was undergoing significant political upheaval and an untimely collapse, a series of events led to the exposure of a previously classified document relating to the Katyn Forest massacre. These documents provided concrete evidence of Soviet responsibility for the massacre, contradicting decades of Soviet propaganda that had blamed the killings on Nazi Germany. The Katyn massacre files, which included orders from Soviet leader Joseph Stalin and other high-ranking officials to execute thousands of Polish prisoners of war, were leaked from Soviet archives. This revelation was a profound moment, not only for historians but also for international relations and the memory of those who perished in the massacre. The disclosure of the documents confirms that many had long suspected, but lacked solid evidence to prove, that the Soviet Union, not Germany, had completely murdered all of these Polish officers and intellectuals in 1940. The release of the files marked a significant step toward acknowledging historical truths and confronting the atrocities committed by the Soviet regime during World War II. These documents played a crucial role in shaping history, understanding and prompting officials to apologize and to acknowledge that this has gone down. The Katyn massacre remains a poignant symbol of Soviet brutality and the complex history of World War II in Eastern Europe. Today, the Katyn massacre stands as a solemn reminder of how fragile human civilization can be, especially enduring legacies of tyranny. Amidst the tranquil beauty of the Katyn forest, the silent echoes of those lost souls, and they serve as a haunting testament to the horrors of war and the capacity for evil that lurks within all of us. It was back in the 1980s. At the time, I was in my late 20s and I would often grab my collie, Lacey, and drive my Mustang convertible to the park not too far from our home to go hiking. Although I was a single female, I always felt safe hiking in that park. It was like my second backyard. It was a hot Sunday morning in July. There was a slight breeze and a beautiful blue sky. It was pretty early, around 8:30 a.m., and the park was deserted when we pulled up into the parking area. The parking lot was near the picnic area and restrooms, and it would get crowded later in the day when the families arrived for their picnics, and the fishermen would make their way out to the lake and try their luck at catching that elusive big one. This park covers 1,900 acres of land and has miles of wooded dirt trails that intersect each other. There are a few main trails that pass by a lake and meander along a lazy river and lead to 3 hidden, breathtaking waterfalls. It is heavily forested, and in the summer, when the leaves are all on board, the trail's visibility is limited to the path. I loved that park, hiked it often, and knew the trails like the back of my hand, and enjoyed having it to myself. I intentionally chose times when I knew it would be less crowded. The lot I parked in is across a little road from the head of my trail. It's my favorite trail. As I called Lacey out of the car and snapped on her leash, another car pulled into the lot. He parked rather close to me, and I found it rather annoying and a bit strange. I go there for solitude and peace, and there were plenty of other parking spots, and there was no need to crowd me. The trail Lacey and I wanted to hike on was across the road, so I headed that way. We started up the hill and onto a heavily wooded hiking trail. For some reason, I was feeling a sense of dread and glanced at the man as he was getting out of his car. I am somewhat suspicious when hiking alone and immediately found him a bit off. Something about him was setting off alarm bells in my head. He appeared to be in his 40s and was by himself, which is not unusual. A lot of people hiked by themselves. It was his attire and demeanor that caught me off guard. He was dressed like no other hiker I have ever seen. He had on dress pants and shiny black dress shoes, like the ones my dad would always wear going to church. The clothes and shoes were a bit shabby, but still not something somebody would wear when hiking. None of the trails in this park were paved. They were all dirt and often muddy since they crossed meandering streams. But it was his expression that struck me the most. He was staring intently at Lacey and I, with no expression on his face, and it was making me extremely uncomfortable. I thought to myself, who does that, and who wears dress shoes hiking? I began to think, and I became more uneasy. There was just something creepy about him. Most people who hike the trails keep to themselves, but will say a brief "Hi, how you doing?" or wave, something like that. This man simply stared intently at Lacey and I with no expression in his blank eyes. I knew somewhere deep down inside of me that it would be the best plan of action to avoid him entirely. It was a little voice in my head that I had to listen to. I considered giving up my hiking altogether that day, but I'd been looking forward to it, and Lacey was raring to go, and maybe I was just being paranoid. So I turned back around and began walking up the main hiking trail. I decided to verge off one of the many little paths that branched off the main trail. I chose this trail as it was not marked with any signage and did not go towards the falls of the river, but winded through the dense, heavily forested woods. It was not as popular as the other trails, and I figured I could avoid the man as he probably would choose one of the more popular marked trails that most hikers would. As Lacey and I walked along, I glanced around to see if I could still see him. To my dread, I realized that he had also chosen the trail we were hiking. I looked around to see if there were any other hikers out, but it was just him, myself, and Lacey. I was not concerned to the point of panic, but still somewhat freaked out. It was just himself, myself, and Lacey. I was not concerned to the point of panic, but still freaked out. I decided it was best to continue to steer clear of him, and as soon as I was able, I took a different cross trail to avoid him. The trail I chose headed off in an entirely different direction from the way he was headed. I kept walking at a fast pace, trying to put as much distance between me and him as possible. I tried to enjoy the gorgeous, beautiful day, but I could not shake the feelings of unease, and all the while walking tried to stay diligent of the man's location. After hiking for about 5 minutes, I began to feel my sense of unease increasing. I turned back to notice that the same figure, once again, was following us in the distance, gaining on us slowly but steadily. He had taken the same intersecting trail as Lacey and I, and was following behind us again. He did not appear to be enjoying the walk, was not looking at the nature around him, just staring right at Lacey and me. He continued to stalk us at a quick pace with a sense of purpose into his stride. His face was motionless, his eyes never leaving us. As I glanced to him, it seemed waves of malice were emanating from him, and I was more scared than I had ever been in my life. By this time, Lacey was beginning to feel my anxiety. She was a beautiful dog and looked a lot like Lassie. She was a good 65 pounds and, unlike most collies, did not care for strangers or anything else out of the ordinary. She was also beginning to pick up on my emotions and starting to perceive this danger. She began stopping and turning, looking back at him, perceiving this person as a threat. I knew all of these trails like the back of my hand and was quite sure we could lose him. I crossed into another trail, and I thought surely we had gotten far enough ahead of him that he would be unable to determine which trail we had walked. Glancing nervously behind me, but much to my horror, when I looked up the trail ahead, I saw him walking straight towards us at a determined pace. He had somehow found the trail that circles around us and then crossed over to head us off. This could be no accident. It was obvious to me now that he was intentionally following us. But why? My brain went into overdrive. All of my senses were telling me that I was not in a good situation. I wondered what I could do. I had a very bad feeling about this man, and had to find an escape route and get back to the safety of my car as quickly as I could. I hastily looked around for another trail that I could take before he would reach us. There was nothing. Quickly thought it through, and determined that my only options were to turn and run back to the opposite direction, dash into the heavily forested woods, or walk right past him. I looked at him, judged the distance, and knew if I ran, even with his street clothes on, he could possibly catch me on the trail. I had no desire to run off into the woods as the grounds are heavily covered with tripping hazards, and I've watched enough horror movies to know that the running victim always trips and falls out of panic. I contemplated all of those options, and you're probably going to think I'm crazy, but I decided the best course of action was to keep walking straight ahead and walk past him. I was not alone. I had Lacey, and she gave me the courage to confront the alarming, disconcerting stranger. As we walked closer to him, he said nothing but kept staring at us intently with his blank, emotionless expression. His eyes were very dark and menacing. I walked nervously towards him, and as we got closer and closer to him, I began talking to Lacey under my breath, urging her on with a desperate voice pleading over and over, "Get him! Get him!" Lacey felt my fear. She felt it to her very core and fed off of it. She began growling low in her throat. The closer he got to us, the louder and more profound the rumbling from within her became. By the time we passed him, I was physically holding her off by her leash. She was lunging at him, snarling and baring her teeth. He did not react like someone being threatened aggressively by a dog. There was no resentment, no irritation. Strangely, he said nothing to me, and I said nothing to him. He passed by us and gave Lacey a wide berth, no longer looking at us or showing any interest at all. I lightly said, "That's not nice, Lacey." I was petting her and encouraging her to growl at him the entire time, though. She continued to give him the Clint Eastwood stare and kept barking until he was well past us. I kept an eye on him, ensuring he did not back away or turn back towards us. I was eventually relieved to see that he made his way to a trail that led to the parking lot. I got in his car and drove away. I continued my hike heading to a different side of the park. I kept thinking about the man and wondering what he had been doing. To this day, I think Lacey saved me from an awful situation, and when we returned home that day, I made sure she got an extra special treat. My name is Johnny. This story happened on June 29th, 2018 in the northern region of Florida. I was 21 years old, working as a beach photographer that summer with my buddy, who had just graduated from college. We both attended the same college in Pennsylvania. Our company put us in a 4-bedroom townhouse with about 10 other people. It was a Friday, and I had the day off. Everyone else was working that day, so I just sat in the house relaxing. As the day went on, I became more and more anxious because I had not done anything active. Usually, I walked at least 10 miles a day on the beach, taking photos of vacationers, and another day on the beach didn't sound as appealing as taking a break inside with the AC and some quality Netflix. But today, I felt I had been too lazy with my time, so I decided to go for a night walk throughout the neighborhood behind our housing development on this nice little nature trail. It's enjoyable to walk there at night, because it's always tranquil, and there is a lot of lovely foliage, mansions, etc. on this walk. I discovered a bike trail that I did not know existed before, and decided to check it out. It goes into the woods, and I thought, why not? Maybe being in the trees will remind me of home in rural Pennsylvania, and relaxed my mind. Little did I know, it would be the exact opposite. The bike trail runs perpendicular to the road and goes along a narrow field of power lines that cut through the woods. It goes for what I would guess about 15 miles at least. I was walking for 20 minutes, and all I could hear was the sound of nature around me. It was very calming, even though the woods always did give me that spooky feeling. It was a nice place to walk, or so I thought. Along my left was the tree line. To my right was the field with a line of telephone poles cutting through the middle of it, and much less thick tree line on the other side, with some swampy marsh areas. It was a full moon that night, so I wasn't in complete darkness and could see pretty much all around me. So, about 10 to 15 minutes into my walk, some clouds came in and covered the moon. It got much darker out of nowhere, so I turned on the flashlight on my phone. I heard a strange noise coming from my right across the field. It sounded like a boar or a pig. It let out a long, low grunt. It didn't sound like the normal sounds that I was used to. It sounded like something had caused it distress. I stood there listening for another sound, but there were no more. I kept walking, hoping I wouldn't hear it again, as it did come out of nowhere, and it startled me. Instantly, I got the feeling of something not being right. All the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I was very unnerved.
Like I felt like I was being watched. I tried to find where I was on Google Maps, but they would not load because the service was very weak. I eventually ran into another path that veered off into the woods, and there luckily was a map on a board beside it. I stared down the course for a few seconds, contemplating whether to take it. It looked like that cliche shortcut that looks super scary but gets you to your destination a bit quicker. This one was dark, and I mean dark. There was a thick canopy above. As this part of the woods, there was only about a foot between the dense trees and the path on both sides. Without the light of my phone, I would not have been able to see a thing in there. I decided to turn and walk along this path, as it was a quicker way home instead of going back and around the way I originally had came. Then, as I was about to head down the said path, I heard footsteps. I stopped and turned my flashlight off to listen. I wanted to make sure I wasn't being paranoid and scaring myself, but I could indeed still hear them. They were coming towards me from the direction I was headed on the main path. I ran over into the trees and hid because I wasn't about to run into some potentially crazy people out here in the woods. As I was hiding in the trees and waiting for them to pass me, I instantly smelled something terrible. I thought maybe I was just so scared that I soiled my pants, but that was not the case. Instead, it smelled like something decomposing, like the smell of a dead deer carcass baking out in the sun. If you've ever been hunting, you definitely know that smell. The footsteps became increasingly closer, then they passed me. I counted 3 people, or should I say silhouettes, and I couldn't make out their faces or even their clothes. They walked in a straight line, their heads staring straight ahead of them, and none of them said a single word. The one in the middle was dragging some sort of bag behind them along the concrete. I waited for about 5 minutes until I could no longer see them, hear them, or smell that smell anymore. I started walking down the dark path, slowly but surely. I tried walking quickly, but I wanted to stay quiet, as I was pretty freaked out. I was wearing flip-flops and they clicked my heels with every step, so the slower I was, the quieter I was. I walked for about 10 minutes, and I started to hear footsteps. Again. I stopped and turned off my flashlight. The footsteps were coming from behind me this time. I ran back into the trees and waited to see if those people were going to come back again, and inevitably, it was. They brought that awful smell back with them and walked past me the same way, dragging the bag behind them. Were these people following me? Why did they happen to turn around and come onto this path as well? I stayed out there in the bushes for about 20 minutes or so, unsure of what to do. I didn't know if I should keep going the way I was going or run back. I hoped they didn't hear me though. As I waited, they came by again. Which is the freaky part. I heard a man's voice say a girl's name, this time though.
Barbara Ann Wilcox.
Or something like that. I waited another 5 minutes and just started running down the path. I picked up my flip-flops to make sure I didn't make any noise, and didn't even turn my flashlight back on. I ran for what honestly seemed like 10 minutes until I eventually had to stop to take a breath. I was still in complete darkness, and I turned my flashlight back on to ensure I wasn't being followed. I didn't smell that horrible smell, so I turned the flashlight back off to save my phone's battery and not give myself away. I didn't know how much longer I had to keep going, as this path did not look nearly as long on the map. I began to hear sticks breaking in the woods. They didn't sound like footsteps, but somewhat random. One would break to the left, then to the right a few minutes later. Finally, they started to get louder, and eventually I bolted again. I ran, and I ran, and I ran. I was afraid that there would be something chasing me if I ever turned around. The sticks breaking seemed to follow along on both sides, not too far behind me. It was a fight or flight situation, and I fled as fast as I could. After what seemed like running for an hour, I eventually saw lights and came out of the woods next to a sewage plant. I hurried home along the highway. No one was home when I returned to the townhouse, as they had all gone to a beach party. So I sat down, got a glass of water, and searched the name I heard on Google. Barbara Ann Wilcox. This is where it gets strange. In a nutshell, Barbara Ann Wilcox and a friend were from Iowa, and they were hiking through Florida in the 1970s. On their trip, they were murdered by a man named Gerard Schaefer. The cherry on top of the cake is that it happened in 1973, and the skeletal remains of the girls were found scattered throughout the area, which is known as Oak Hammock Park, in 1977. by a group of fishermen. Why were 3 people, if that's what they were, walking through the woods at night in the pitch black saying the name of a girl that died 40 years ago, about 7 hours away in a different part of Florida altogether? And what the hell were they dragging behind them? I'm not sure if I want to know the answers. Throughout the rest of my summer, working in Florida, I continued to do my night walks, but I never went on that bike trail again. So, if you're ever alone in the woods, please be careful. You never know who or what you will find, or worse, who might see you.